The first time I noticed something was wrong was during Sunday dinner, when Zoe casually mentioned how quaint it must be to live in the same house for 40 years. Her tone dripped with condescension, but my son James just smiled adoringly at his new wife, completely missing the slight. I'm Alea, and this house has been more than just a home to me. It's where I raised James alone after his father passed, where I nursed my mother through her final days, and where 3 generations of my family have lived and loved. Every crack in the walls tells a story. Every worn floorboard holds a memory. Actually, I said, keeping my voice light as I passed the mashed potatoes, it's been 43 years. My parents bought it when I was 17. Zoe's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her wine glass. That's sweet, but don't you think it's time for something more modern? James and I were just discussing how much potential this place has. I caught Fiona's eye across the table. My best friend's eyebrows shot up, but she kept quiet. She'd been coming to these Sunday dinners for 20 years, and I could tell she was as thrown by Zoe's comment as I was. The house is perfect as it is, James said quickly, but there was something uncertain in his voice that made my stomach clench. Of course it is, honey. Zoe patted his hand. I just think with some updates, we could really increase its value. The market in this neighborhood is incredible right now. Its value? I set down my fork. Are you planning to sell it? Mom, James interrupted. Nobody's selling anything. Zoe's just thinking about the future, that's all. The future. 6 months ago, the future had seemed so clear. James had met Zoe at his accounting firm, and their whirlwind romance had swept us all along. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to make my son happier than I'd ever seen him. But lately, something felt off. I brought dessert, Fiona announced, breaking the tension. Alea, help me serve? In the kitchen, Fiona grabbed my arm. Did you hear that? Increase its value? Who talks like that about someone else's home? I pulled plates from the cabinet, trying to keep my hands steady. Maybe I'm being oversensitive. She's young, successful, probably just thinks differently about property. Or maybe she's showing her true colors. Fiona lowered her voice. Have you noticed how she's been rearranging things? Last week she moved your family photos from the living room. She said it would look more modern. In your house, Alea. Your house. Back in the dining room, Zoe was on her phone, speaking in hushed tones. Perfect timing, actually. No, trust me, it's practically a done deal. She looked up, quickly ending the call as we entered. Who was that, sweetheart? James asked. Oh, just work. She smiled brightly. You know how it is, always something coming up. I served the apple pie my mother taught me to make, the recipe passed down like this house, like the memories within its walls. Zoe took one bite and pushed it aside. I should really watch my sugar intake, she said. But James, honey, remember that realtor I mentioned? She's free tomorrow if you want to meet her. Realtor? I nearly dropped my fork. What realtor? James shifted uncomfortably. It's nothing, Mom. Zoe just thought it might be helpful to get an assessment. You know, for insurance purposes. Insurance purposes! I repeated the word slowly, watching Zoe's face. For a moment, her mask slipped, and I caught a glimpse of something calculating in her eyes. Exactly, she said smoothly. It's important to know what you're sitting on, isn't it? Especially in a neighborhood like this. Properties like this are opportunities. The word hung in the air like a threat. Fiona cleared her throat, but before she could speak, Zoe's phone buzzed again. I really should take this, she said, standing. James, coming? My son followed her like a puppy, leaving Fiona and me staring at half-eaten pieces of pie. Alea, Fiona said quietly, I don't want to alarm you, but I've seen this before. My sister lost her house to a manipulative daughter-in-law. Started just like this. Casual comments, subtle suggestions. I looked around my dining room, at the walls that had witnessed countless family meals, at the window where I used to watch James play as a child. She's not getting my house, Fiona. No, my friend agreed, her voice hardening. She's not, but you need to be careful, very careful. As if on cue, Zoe's laugh drifted in from the living room, followed by words that made my blood run cold. Don't worry about her. She has no idea what's coming. I never meant to snoop through James's study, but when I heard whispers through the door while cleaning, my hand froze on the doorknob. Zoe was inside, talking on her phone again. Everything's proceeding perfectly, she said. The old lady trusts me completely. James, please, he's so desperate for approval he'd sign anything I put in front of him. My heart pounded as I eased the door open just a crack. Zoe was rifling through James's desk, pulling out folders. The property assessment came back even higher than we expected, she continued. Once we get her to sign over her rights, yes, exactly, we can flip it immediately. The developers are already interested. I must have made a sound because she suddenly went quiet. I hurried down the hallway, my cleaning supplies clutched to my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the kitchen. 10 minutes later, I called Fiona. I need your help, I said. Remember how you used to work for that private investigator? Say no more, Fiona replied. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived with her laptop and a determined expression. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped James with his homework all those years ago. First things first, Fiona said, typing rapidly. Let's see what we can find about our dear Zoe's past. Hours later, we stared at the screen in disbelief. 3 failed businesses, Fiona read, 2 bankruptcies, and look at this, she was involved in a lawsuit over a property scheme in Florida. What kind of scheme? She convinced an elderly couple to sign over their beach house for estate planning purposes, sold it right from under them. My hands shook as I poured more coffee. We need to tell James. Not yet, Fiona warned. He's too in love to see clearly. We need concrete proof. A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Colin, my neighbor from across the street. Alea, he said, looking troubled. I think you should know. I saw some men in suits looking at your house yesterday. They were taking measurements of the property line. Did they say who they were? Development company. Your daughter-in-law was with them. I invited him in, and he sat heavily at the table. There's more. I overheard them discussing demolition costs. Demolition? My voice cracked. They want to tear down my house? The whole block, actually. They're planning luxury condos. Fiona's fingers flew across the keyboard. Got it. Highland Development Group. And look who's listed as their new real estate consultant, Zoe Harper, as of 2 months ago. Before she married James, I whispered. That's not all, Fiona said grimly. I found something in her social media, posted 6 months ago. Found the perfect mark. Time to play the long game. The date matched exactly when she'd met James. My neighbor leaned forward. Alea, I've lived here 30 years. We all know what this house means to you. What do you need from us? Before I could answer, I heard a key in the front door. James's voice called out, Mom, you home? Quick, I hissed. Fiona slammed her laptop shut as Colin stood. Just dropping off some mail that was misdelivered, he said loudly as James entered the kitchen. Oh, hey everyone, James said, then frowned. Mom, why do you look so upset? Just tired, honey. I forced a smile. How was work? Good. Actually, Zoe and I wanted to talk to you about something. She's found this great estate lawyer who can help us sort out the house situation. Make everything more official. Official? I kept my voice steady. Yeah, for inheritance purposes. Zoe thinks it would be better to handle it now rather than later. The lawyer's coming by tomorrow. After James left, Fiona grabbed my hand. We need to call Caleb. Caleb? But he's just a family friend. Who happens to be the best real estate lawyer in the city? Trust me, we're going to need him. I nodded slowly, remembering the determined look in Zoe's eyes when she'd first toured my house, the way she'd measured every room with her gaze. Make the call, I said. As Fiona dialed, I found myself staring at the family photos Zoe had tried to hide away. There was James on his first bike, my parents on their 50th anniversary, all the memories she wanted to bulldoze for her luxury condos. Caleb, it's Fiona. We need your help. Remember Alea? Well, her daughter-in-law is trying to pull something, and we need to set a trap. I listened as Fiona explained the situation, watched as Caleb's name appeared on her screen for a video call. For the first time since I'd overheard Zoe's phone conversation, I felt a spark of hope. Don't worry, Caleb's voice came through clear and determined. I've seen this before, and I know exactly how to handle it. The key is to let her think she's winning, Caleb explained, spreading documents across my dining room table. These are the papers she'll want you to sign tomorrow, but these, he pulled out another set, are what you'll actually be signing. I don't understand, I said, studying both sets. They look identical. That's the point. Caleb tapped the second stack. But these have a special clause. The moment she attempts to sell or develop the property without your explicit written consent, everything reverts to you exclusively. Plus, it triggers an immediate fraud investigation. Fiona grinned. Brilliant. She won't even read the fine print. She'll be too excited thinking she's won. But James? My voice caught. He'll be devastated. Better devastated than bankrupted, Caleb said gently. I've seen the financial records Fiona dug up. Zoe's planning to drain him dry along with taking your house. A knock at the door made us all jump. It was Colin again, looking agitated. Those developers are back, he reported. They're measuring the front yard now. Zoe's with them, showing them something on her tablet. I walked to the window. Sure enough, there they were, men in expensive suits, walking my property like they already owned it. Zoe stood among them in her designer clothes, gesturing enthusiastically. Perfect timing, Caleb said. Let's give her something to get excited about. Alea, go out there. Tell her you've been thinking about what she said regarding estate planning. My hands trembled as I opened the front door. Zoe's face shifted from annoyance to false warmth when she saw me. Oh, Alea, I was just showing these gentlemen your lovely garden. They're landscape architects. How nice, I said, forcing my voice to waver slightly. Actually, Zoe dear, I've been thinking about what you said, about making things official. Her eyes lit up like a shark spotting blood in the water. Really? Oh, that's wonderful. I was so hoping you'd come around. These things are so important to sort out. Yes, well, getting older makes one think. I wrung my hands for effect. Perhaps we could meet with that lawyer you mentioned. Tomorrow, maybe? Tomorrow? Yes, absolutely. She practically bounced on her expensive heels. I'll call him right away. This is so perfect. I mean, so sensible of you. Back inside, Caleb nodded approvingly. You played that perfectly. Now, let's go over exactly how tomorrow will work. We spent the next hour rehearsing. Caleb taught me how to appear hesitant but compliant, how to ask just enough questions to seem concerned but not suspicious. The moment she sees you wavering, he explained, she'll push harder. That's when we'll have her. What about James? I asked again. He'll be there too. Actually, he won't. Fiona held up her phone. I just got a text from my niece at his office. Zoe arranged for him to be sent to an urgent client meeting tomorrow afternoon. My stomach churned. She's making sure he's not here for the signing. More evidence of her deception, Caleb said firmly. We're doing this to protect both you and James. That evening, after everyone left, I sat in my living room looking at old photos. There was one of James on his wedding day, beaming at Zoe like she hung the moon. My son, who'd always worn his heart on his sleeve, just like his father. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. So happy you're being reasonable about this. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Don't worry about a thing. I'll handle everything. I bet you will, I thought, but typed back, thank you, dear. You're so good to help with all this. Another buzz, this time from Caleb. Everything's set. Remember, let her think she's in control. We'll be right next door at Colin's house. I walked through my home that night, touching the walls, remembering. The height marks showing James's growth in the kitchen door frame, the dent in the living room wall from when he tried to learn juggling, the garden his father planted, where I still grew tomatoes every summer. Not this time, I whispered to the empty house. She's not taking you from us. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Fiona. Just drove past. Zoe's outside with those developers again. They're drinking champagne in their car. I smiled, thinking of the trap we'd set, of Caleb's carefully worded documents waiting in his briefcase. Let them drink their champagne. Let them celebrate too early. Tomorrow, they'd learn what happens when you underestimate a mother protecting her home. The lawyer Zoe brought looked exactly as I'd expected. Expensive suit, practiced smile, and eyes that never quite met mine. He spread the papers across my dining room table while Zoe hovered nearby, practically vibrating with poorly concealed excitement. It's really quite simple, he explained, pointing to various sections. Just a standard transfer of property for estate planning purposes. And this protects my son? I asked, using the trembling voice Caleb had helped me practice. Of course, Zoe jumped in. That's what this is all about. Family protection. I noticed she'd already started making changes to my home. The family photos were completely gone now, replaced by generic modern art. She'd even rearranged my furniture, pushing my favorite reading chair into a corner. I just need a moment, I said, standing up, to get some water. In the kitchen, I sent a quick text to Caleb. We're starting. They brought their own papers. His response was immediate. Perfect. Let them present first, then mention you had your own lawyer review some documents. When I returned, Zoe was on her phone, speaking in hushed tones. Yes, everything's proceeding as planned. The old lady's about to... Oh, she's back. Got to go. I pretended not to hear, settling back into my chair with shaking hands, this time from genuine anger rather than acting. Before we begin, I said, I had a family friend look over some similar documents. He's a lawyer, too. Would you mind reviewing them? The flash of panic on Zoe's face was quickly masked. Oh, we don't need a second opinion. These papers are completely standard. Still, I insisted, pulling out Caleb's documents. I'd feel better. The lawyer reluctantly took them, scanning the pages. His eyebrows rose slightly. He was good, but not good enough to hide his surprise at the sophisticated legal framework Caleb had constructed. These seem quite thorough, he said carefully. Is there a problem? Zoe's voice had an edge now. Not at all, I said, channeling every ounce of naivety I could muster. They're just for protection, right? Like you said. Zoe and her lawyer exchanged glances. After a whispered consultation, they agreed to use my documents, exactly as Caleb had predicted. They were too confident in their scheme to imagine I could outmaneuver them. The moment after I signed, Zoe's entire demeanor changed. She pulled out her phone, rapidly typing. I'm thinking we'll start with the kitchen, she announced. I've already contacted contractors. That awful old stove has to go. But I still live here, I protested. For now, she didn't even try to hide her smirk. But let's be realistic. At your age, wouldn't you be more comfortable in a nice retirement community? I know several excellent ones. A text buzzed on her phone. She read it and actually clapped her hands. Perfect. The developers can start surveying tomorrow. We'll need you to clear out within 30 days. Developers? I forced my voice to crack. What developers? Oh, didn't James tell you? This whole block is being redeveloped. Your house will be demolished, but don't worry, the condos they're building will be beautiful. Of course, you won't be able to afford one, but that's life, isn't it? The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps we should discuss this later. Why? Zoe laughed. It's done. She signed. This house and property are under my control now. She turned to me with false sympathy. I know change is hard at your age, but you'll adjust. Maybe if you're lucky, James will let you visit once the new condos are built. My phone buzzed. Fiona, just saw James's car pull up. Perfect timing. The front door opened and James called out, Mom, why is there a developer's truck outside? Zoe's face went pale. You're supposed to be at that client meeting. It was canceled. James entered the dining room, taking in the scene, the papers, the lawyer, my devastated expression, and Zoe's barely concealed triumph. What's going on here? Your mother's just signed some estate planning documents, Zoe said quickly. Everything's fine. Estate planning? James picked up the papers. Then why does this mention Highland Development Group? Don't worry about that, honey. It's all being handled. Handled? James's voice rose. Like how you handled that meeting cancellation? I just found out you arranged it yourself. Zoe's mask slipped completely. You're overreacting. This is business, a fantastic opportunity. Your mother's fine with it, aren't you, Alea? I said nothing, watching my son's face as he read through the documents, seeing the moment realization dawned. You're trying to sell my mother's house? His hands were shaking. Behind my back? Not trying, Zoe snapped, her pretense finally dropping entirely. Already done, and there's nothing any of you can do about it. I smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Actually, I said quietly, that's where you're wrong. What do you mean, wrong? Zoe's voice had lost its smooth confidence. You signed the papers. It's done. Did you actually read what I signed? I asked, standing up slowly. Every word, every clause. Her lawyer grabbed the documents, scanning them more carefully this time. His face went ashen. Ms. Harper, we need to talk. Now. What? She snatched the papers from him. These aren't the same documents we prepared. James looked between us, confusion turning to anger. You prepared documents without telling me? Honey, please, Zoe backpedaled. This is all just a misunderstanding. The front door opened again. Caleb walked in, followed by Fiona and Colin. Actually, Caleb said, it's a very clear understanding. Those documents your wife just tried to rush through, they're evidence of attempted property fraud. That's ridiculous. Zoe spun toward her lawyer. Tell them. But he was already packing his briefcase. I suggest you get separate representation, Ms. Harper. I want no part of this. Part of what? James demanded. Will someone please explain what's happening? I nodded to Colin, who pulled out his phone. I've been recording Zoe's meetings with the developers. Would you like to hear what your wife says about you when you're not around? He pressed play. Zoe's voice filled the room. James is just a means to an end. Once we get the property, we can push him out too. He's as naive as his mother. James staggered back like he'd been physically struck. Zoe? It's not what you think, she said quickly. They're taking this out of context. Really? Fiona pulled out her laptop. Then let's add some context. Like your social media posts about finding the perfect mark right when you met James, or your new job with Highland Development, which you conveniently never mentioned, or maybe your previous property fraud cases. Previous cases? James whispered. She's done this before, I said gently. In Florida, another family lost their home. You can't prove anything. Zoe's composure cracked completely. This is all circumstantial. That's why I installed cameras, I said quietly. After you started moving my things, holding secret meetings in my house, I decided to protect myself. I nodded to Caleb, who connected his tablet to my TV. The screen flickered to life, showing Zoe in my living room just yesterday, speaking to the developers. Once we get the old lady's signature, demolition can start immediately. She doesn't know the documents give me full control. James? Please, he's so blindly in love, he won't realize what's happening until it's too late. By then, we'll have flipped the property, and I'll be done with this whole family. The room fell silent except for James's ragged breathing. I trusted you, he said finally. I loved you. James, baby, please, get out. His voice was ice. Get out of my mother's house. You can't actually, Caleb interrupted. He can. The documents your wife just signed, they include an immediate eviction clause triggered by any evidence of fraud, which we now have in abundance. This isn't over, Zoe snarled, grabbing her purse. I'll fight this. Go ahead, I said calmly. The police would love to see all our evidence. I'm sure your previous victims would too. She stormed out, heels clicking furiously on my hardwood floors. Her lawyer followed quickly, avoiding everyone's eyes. James collapsed into a chair, head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I know, honey. I touched his shoulder gently. She fooled a lot of people. The developers, he said suddenly, looking up. They're still coming tomorrow. No, Caleb smiled. They're not. Once they see these documents and evidence of fraud, they'll run for the hills. No legitimate company wants this kind of scandal. Fiona started gathering up papers. We should get these somewhere safe. Zoe might try something desperate. Already handled, Caleb said. I filed copies with the court and sent everything to the FBI's Real Estate Fraud Division. They were very interested in adding this to their existing file on Ms. Harper. Existing file? James looked sick. How did I not see any of this? Because she's very good at what she does, Colin said kindly, but not good enough to fool a mother's instincts. I looked around my living room, at the spaces where my family photos would soon return, at my son's devastated but relieved face, at my friends who had helped save my home. She thought I was just a helpless old lady, I said. That was her biggest mistake. The next morning, I found James in his old bedroom, sitting on the floor surrounded by moving boxes. He'd spent the night there, unable to face the condo he shared with Zoe. Look what I found, he said, holding up a worn notebook, my old journal from college. I sat beside him on the floor, ignoring my creaking joints. He flipped through the pages, then stopped suddenly. There's a new entry here, from last week. His voice cracked as he read. Something feels wrong. The way Zoe talks about Mom's house, the secret phone calls, the meetings she thinks I don't know about. But what if I'm just being paranoid? What if questioning this ruins everything? A knock at the door interrupted us. Through the window, I saw Zoe standing on my porch, wearing her most expensive suit. Don't answer it, James said quickly. We have to. I squeezed his hand. Caleb said to record everything from now on. I opened the door. Zoe's makeup was perfect, but her eyes were wild. We need to talk, she said, pushing past me into the house. James, baby, I know you're here. Don't call me that. James emerged from the hallway, journal still in his hand. This is all a misunderstanding, she said, reaching for him. I can explain everything. Like you explained to the developers how you were going to scam my mother? Or like you explained to your friends how naive I am? Those recordings are taken out of context. She spun toward me. This is your fault. You turned him against me. You did that yourself, I said calmly, pressing record on my phone. Every lie, every secret meeting, every manipulation, those were your choices. Choices? She laughed hysterically. You want to talk about choices? Fine. James, your mother's been manipulating you your whole life, keeping you close, making you feel guilty about this stupid house. Stop it, James snapped. Just stop. No, you stop. Wake up. This was a business opportunity. A good one. But you're too blinded by mommy's guilt trips to see it. We could have been rich. By destroying my family home? By lying to me? Oh, please, she sneered. You knew something was wrong. I saw your pathetic little journal entries. But you were so desperate to believe in our perfect marriage that you ignored every red flag. James went pale. You read my journal? Of course I did. I had to make sure you weren't catching on too quickly. Had to keep you distracted with date nights and future plans while I set everything up. Set what up exactly? I asked, making sure my phone caught every word. All of it. She was practically shouting now. The job with Highland Development, the marriage, everything. Do you know how long I worked to find the perfect property? The perfect mark. Then I find out about James, single, desperate for love, with a mother sitting on prime real estate. She stopped suddenly, realizing what she was admitting. Keep going, James said quietly. Tell us how you really feel. I didn't mean, yes, you did. He opened the journal. Want to hear what else you didn't mean? The lies about business trips when you were meeting developers? The work calls that were actually plotting sessions? James, get out. His voice shook. Get out before I call the police. You can't prove anything. Actually, Caleb's voice came from the doorway. He just did. He held up his own phone, recording. Confession of premeditated fraud, caught on multiple devices. The FBI will be very interested. Zoe's face contorted. You're all gonna regret this. I have connections. Like these? Fiona walked in behind Caleb, carrying a stack of papers. Your connections turned on you the moment we showed them the evidence. Highland Development just terminated your contract. They're cooperating fully with investigators. No? Zoe stumbled backward. No, this isn't happening. It is, I said. And Zoe, you were wrong about one thing. This isn't just a house. It's a home, something you clearly wouldn't understand. She ran out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Through the curtains, I watched her speed away in her expensive car. James slumped against the wall. I'm such an idiot. No, I said firmly. You're someone who wanted to believe in love. That's not idiotic. It's human. The police will want to talk to both of you, Caleb said gently, and there will probably be a trial. Good. James straightened up. I want everyone to know what she tried to do, what she's probably done to others. I looked at my son, hurt but standing tall, betrayed but fighting back, and felt a fierce pride. We'll face it together, I said. That's what family does. Real family, he agreed, putting the journal away. Not the fake kind that comes with hidden agendas. The courthouse buzzed with tension as Zoe strode in, still wearing designer clothes, but noticeably less polished than before. 3 months had passed since her confession in my living room, and now we were all here for the final hearing. All rise, the bailiff called out. James sat beside me, his knuckles white as he gripped the bench. Behind us, Fiona, Colin, and Caleb filled the row in silent support. How can she look so confident? James whispered as Zoe took her seat. After everything they found? The evidence had been damning. Once the FBI started digging, they uncovered a pattern stretching back years. Multiple properties, multiple victims, all carefully documented in Zoe's meticulous files. The judge cleared his throat. Before we proceed with sentencing, would any of the victims like to make a statement? An elderly couple from Florida went first, describing how Zoe had taken their beach house. Then a widow from Arizona, tears streaming as she recounted losing her family ranch. Finally, it was our turn. The defendant didn't just try to steal my home, I said, standing slowly. She tried to destroy my family. She married my son as part of her scheme, used his love as a weapon against both of us. Zoe's smirk faltered for the first time. But she underestimated us, I continued. She thought age meant weakness. She thought a mother's love could be overcome by greed. She was wrong. Objection, Zoe's lawyer called out. This is inflammatory. Overruled, the judge said. Continue, ma'am. I'm not asking for revenge, I said. I'm asking for justice, not just for me and my son, but for everyone she's hurt, everyone she saw as nothing more than marks to be exploited. James stood next. His voice shook at first but grew stronger with each word. I loved you, he said directly to Zoe. I thought we had a future together, but our entire marriage was just part of your con. You didn't just try to steal my mother's house. You stole a year of my life, my trust, my ability to believe in love. Zoe finally spoke up. This is ridiculous. It was business, nothing more. They're painting me as some kind of monster. Ms. Harper, the judge interrupted sharply, you'll have your chance to speak. When her turn came, Zoe's performance was Oscar-worthy. Tears, trembling voice, claims of misunderstanding, and good intentions. But the evidence told a different story. The recorded conversations, the fraudulent documents, the paper trail of previous scams. Your Honor, Caleb stood, presenting one final piece of evidence. We've just received this from the FBI. Bank records showing Ms. Harper attempted to transfer funds from her latest property scheme even after her arrest. She's still trying to profit from her victims. Zoe's facade cracked completely. You don't understand. These people are sitting on gold mines, too stupid to see the potential. That's enough, the judge cut in. I've heard everything I need to hear. He shuffled his papers, then looked directly at Zoe. Ms. Harper, your actions show a pattern of calculated deception and criminal intent that this court cannot ignore. The sentence came down like a thunderbolt. 8 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, and a lifetime ban from real estate transactions. No, Zoe shrieked as officers approached. You can't do this. I have rights. So did all the people you stole from, the judge replied coldly. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. James, baby, please, don't let them do this. But James stood firm, his arm around my shoulders. Goodbye, Zoe. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Caleb handled most of the questions, while Fiona and Colin ran interference. How does it feel to be the ones who finally stopped her? Someone shouted. It feels like justice, I said simply, not just for us, but for everyone she hurt. Later that evening, we all gathered in my living room, the same room where Zoe had revealed her true nature months ago. The family photos were back on the walls, my furniture returned to its proper places. I found something else, James said, pulling out an envelope. Zoe's divorce papers, already signed. Good riddance, Fiona muttered. To new beginnings, Colin raised his glass. I watched my son smile, really smile, for the first time in months. The shadows hadn't completely left his eyes, but they were fading. Mom, he said quietly, I'm sorry I ever doubted. Don't, I interrupted. You loved her. That's nothing to apologize for. The house is safe now, Caleb added. I've added extra legal protections. No one will ever be able to pull something like this again. I looked around at my family, not just James, but all of them. The people who had stood by us, fought for us, believed in us. She thought she was taking a house, I said. She never understood she was taking on a family. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen windows as I watered the tomato plants on the windowsill, tiny seedlings from my garden, now safely growing indoors as winter approached. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the house with its familiar aroma. A knock at the door revealed James, carrying a box of old photos and a newspaper. "Have you seen this?" He spread the paper on the kitchen table. The headline read, "Property Fraud Ring Exposed. Former Real Estate Agent's Conviction Leads to Broader Investigation." Highland Development CEO was arrested this morning, James said, pouring coffee. Turns out Zoe wasn't the only one running these scams. She was just their most successful operative. Until she met us, I smiled, setting out breakfast plates. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Margaret, the widow from Arizona, who had testified at Zoe's trial. She'd flown in specially for today. "The movers are bringing my furniture back tomorrow," she beamed. "Thanks to the restitution order, I'm getting my ranch back." More people arrived. Fiona with fresh muffins, Colin carrying folders, Caleb in his usual suit. Soon my kitchen was full of chatter and life. "The support group starts next week," Margaret announced, spreading papers across my table. "For victims of property fraud. We've already got 15 members." "And the foundation?" Caleb asked. "Ready to launch," I confirmed. "James did all the paperwork." The foundation had been James's idea, using part of the restitution money to help other fraud victims fight back. My house, which Zoe had seen as nothing but profit potential, would now host monthly meetings for people fighting to save their own homes. "First case is already lined up," Colin said. "Family in Oregon, similar situation to yours. Developer trying to force them out through fraudulent paperwork." "We'll stop them," James said firmly, "just like we stopped Zoe." The doorbell chimed again. This time it was a young couple, clutching paperwork and looking nervous. "Please come in," I said warmly. "You must be the Thompsons. Caleb told us about your situation." "We didn't know where else to turn," Mrs. Thompson whispered. "The bank says our signatures are on sale documents we never signed." "You're in the right place," James assured them. "Show us everything." As everyone gathered around my dining room table, the same table where Zoe had tried to trick me with fraudulent documents, I watched James spread out the Thompsons' papers, explaining terms, pointing out red flags. His pain had become purpose. "Mom?" He looked up. "Can you tell them what to watch for? The little signs we missed at first?" "Of course." I sat beside Mrs. Thompson. "First, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong." The morning turned to afternoon as we worked. More people dropped by, other victims from Zoe's trial, neighbors who'd helped gather evidence, even the FBI agent who'd handled our case, bringing updates on the expanding investigation. "Your case broke it wide open," she explained. "We've identified 30 more victims across 6 states. And they'll all get justice," Caleb added. "The precedent from Zoe's trial makes these cases much stronger." As the sun began to set, I stood in my doorway watching everyone leave. The Thompsons looked hopeful now, armed with knowledge and support. Margaret was discussing ranch renovation plans with Colin. Fiona and Caleb were already reviewing the next case. James lingered behind, gathering the empty coffee cups. "You know what Zoe never understood?" he said, placing them in the sink. "A house isn't just walls and property value. It's memories and family and love. And now it's something else, too," I added. "A place where people can find help and hope." He hugged me tightly. "I'm staying for dinner. We can go through those old photos I brought." As we sat at the kitchen table, sorting through memories while new tomatoes grew on the windowsill, I thought about Zoe sitting in her prison cell. She'd tried to take my home, but instead, she'd given us a mission. The doorbell rang one final time. Another family stood on my porch, papers in hand, fear in their eyes, but hope in their hearts. "Come in," I said, opening my door wide. "Tell us your story. We can help." Because that's what this house had become, not just my home, but a beacon for others. Every person Zoe had seen as a target, we would see as family. Every house she'd viewed as profit, we would help protect as a home. That was our revenge, and it was sweeter than anything she could have imagined.